Look, Dad, that stinky girl's eating a rat. A spoiled 4-year-old heir laughed at the poor girl who was starving and had to eat rats and scraps. But his father, who was very wise and wanted to teach him a lesson, said, "Eat that rat to learn. A lesson, but what happens next will shock you. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important." The scorching sun of Harmony Creek, Ohio, beat down on downtown that afternoon in December. Theodore Ted Barrett, a 45-year-old real estate developer, walked hand in hand with his son, Miles, a 4-year-old boy dressed in designer clothes and carrying an imported chocolate ice cream. The boy, accustomed to the air conditioning of the mansion in the city's most upscale neighborhood, complained about the heat as they passed the stores. "Dad, I want to go back to the car. It's too hot," Miles whined, tugging on the sleeve of his father's Italian suit. "We're going back soon, son. I just need to take care of one last thing at the county clerk's office," Ted replied, trying to quicken his pace while checking messages on his latest model smartphone. It was at that moment that everything changed. Miles stopped abruptly, pointing to a scene happening near a dumpster. A girl of about 6 years old, wearing dirty and torn clothes, was rummaging through the leftovers discarded by a nearby diner. "Look, Dad! That stinky girl's eating a rat!" Miles shouted, provoking laughter from some people passing by. The girl, whose name was Lily, although no one there knew her name yet, tried to hide behind the dumpster, her small hands trembling as she held a piece of stale bread found among the scraps. Silent tears streamed down her dirty face, further staining her grimy cheeks. Ted felt his blood boil. In his 45 years of life, 20 of them dedicated to building a real estate empire that had made him one of the richest men in Ohio, he had never felt so ashamed, not of the girl, but of his own son. "Miles!" His voice thundered, making the boy shrink back. "What kind of behavior is that?" The people around, who were laughing before, now watched in silence the scene that unfolded. Ted let go of his son's hand and approached the girl, who was trying to make herself even smaller behind the dumpster. "Hey, sweetie," he said, bending down to her level. "Don't be afraid. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, looking around like a cornered animal. Her eyes, despite the fear, had a vivacity that contrasted with her desolate appearance. Lily," she replied, almost in a whisper. "Lily, where's your mom?" The question made the girl's lips tremble. "I don't know. I haven't seen her for 3 weeks." Ted felt a lump in his throat. "And where are you sleeping?" "There!" She pointed to the awning of a closed store, where a piece of cardboard served as a bed. At that moment, something inside Ted changed. He looked at his son, who watched the scene with a mixture of confusion and shame, then at his expensive cell phone, and finally at the barefoot girl in front of him. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand to Lily. The girl recoiled. "I can't. Mom told me not to go with strangers." "Your mom's right," Ted replied. "But you can't stay here. I'm going to take you to my house, give you a bath, food, and we'll look for your mom together, I promise." Lily looked long at Ted's outstretched hand, then at Miles, who now seemed smaller in his designer clothes, and finally at the sky, as if looking for a sign. "Do you promise you'll find my mom?" "I promise," Ted replied, with a conviction that surprised even himself. The drive to the Barrett mansion was made in tense silence. Miles, for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. Lily looked out the window of the imported car with a mixture of fear and fascination, her small hands clinging to the leather seat as if fearing that everything would disappear. When they arrived at the mansion, Isabella, Ted's wife, was waiting for them at the door. A woman of 40, elegant but with sad eyes, which carried the marks of a deep depression caused by complications during childbirth that prevented her from having more children. "Ted, what does this mean?" she asked, observing the dirty girl getting out of the car. "Isabella, this is Lily. She's going to stay with us until we find her mother," Ted declared, in a tone that brooked no discussion. Dinner was served in silence at the main table, something that had never happened before. The housekeeper, following Ted's orders, had prepared a true feast. Lily looked at everything with wide eyes, not daring to touch anything. It was then that Ted did something no one expected. He took a piece of cheese from the dessert cart and placed it on Miles's plate. "Eat that rat to learn what humility is," he said, with a seriousness that made the boy pale. "But, Dad, that's not a rat," Miles protested, with tears in his eyes. "It isn't, is it?" Ted replied. "Just like Lily wasn't eating a rat, but you humiliated her in front of everyone. Now you're going to feel a little of what she felt." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella watched the scene with a mixture of horror and fascination. Lily kept her eyes fixed on her plate, but her lips trembled slightly. That night, while Lily slept in one of the guest rooms after a hot bath and wearing clean pajamas belonging to Miles, Ted made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, another to a private investigator, and a third to the local newspaper. The search for Irene, Lily's mother, would begin immediately. What no one knew at that moment was that that night would mark only the beginning of a story that would change the lives of everyone in that house forever. A story about pride and humility, about loss and redemption, and about how sometimes we need to lose everything we thought was important to discover what really matters. The first week at the Barrett mansion was a difficult period of adjustment for everyone. Isabella, still resistant to Lily's presence, kept her distance, watching from afar as the housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, took care of the girl. However, something began to change when one Wednesday morning she found Lily sitting on the floor of the library, carefully leafing through one of her old art books. "Sorry, Mom," Lily said, startled, closing the book quickly. "I just wanted to see the pictures." Isabella picked up the book Lily was holding. It was her old Van Gogh album, a gift from Ted in their first year of marriage, when she still dreamed of being a painter. The pages were open to The Starry Night. "Do you like this painting?" Isabella asked, sitting down next to the girl. "It's pretty," Lily replied, her eyes shining. "It looks like the sky's dancing." Those simple words struck Isabella like lightning. That was exactly how she described the painting years ago, before depression stole her colors. Without realizing it, tears began to stream down her face. "Ma'am, why are you crying?" Lily asked, worried. "It's nothing, honey," Isabella replied, wiping away the tears. "Want me to teach you how to read the painter's name?" On the other side of the mansion, Miles watched the scene hidden behind the door, his little heart burning with jealousy. Since Lily had arrived, he felt invisible. His father, always busy with calls about the search for the girl's mother, barely had time for his bedtime stories. And now his mother, who had barely left her room for months, was there smiling at a stranger. The next morning, when Lily went to look for her new shoes to go to the doctor, Ted had insisted on a complete checkup. She couldn't find them anywhere. After 2 hours of searching, the shoes mysteriously appeared inside the swimming pool. "It must have been the wind," Miles said, with a malicious smile, as Lily fished out the soaked shoes. But Miles's little triumph was short-lived. That same afternoon during dinner, Ted received a call that would change everything. "What do you mean the hotel is mine?" His voice thundered through the dining room. "And are you sure this Irene worked there, Frank?" On the other end of the line, his cousin and partner Frank seemed nervous. "Yes, Ted. She was a cleaner, but she was accused of theft by a guest. I didn't want to bother you with it at the time." "Didn't want to bother me," Ted interrupted. "An employee is unfairly accused, leaves a child alone, and you didn't think it was important to let me know?" Frank's silence was revealing. Ted hung up the phone, his face red with anger. It was when he noticed Lily huddled in her chair, trembling. "Lily," he called, softening his voice. "Did your mum work at the Spring Hotel?" The girl nodded, tears beginning to form. "The rich lady said that Mom took a necklace, but it wasn't her. I saw the lady dropping the necklace in the toilet and flushing it. Then she yelled at Mom." Isabella, who until then had watched the scene in silence, stood up abruptly. "Ted, we need to talk. In private. In the study, away from the children's ears," Isabella exploded. "How could your cousin do this? An innocent woman, an abandoned child, and he knew all along?" "There's something wrong here, Isabella," Ted replied, running his hands over his face. "Frank is hiding something. Why would he cover up a false accusation of theft?" "What if it wasn't just that?" Isabella asked, a new light in her eyes. "What if there's more he's hiding?" While the adults talked, something unexpected happened in Lily's room. Miles, consumed by guilt after hearing the story of her mother, sneaked in, carrying his own new shoes. "Here," he said, placing the shoes next to the bed. "They're better than the wet ones." Lily looked at him, confused. "But they're your favorite shoes." "Now they're yours," Miles replied, avoiding her gaze. "Sorry for throwing the other ones in the pool." It was the first time Lily had truly smiled since arriving at the mansion. The next morning, Ted arrived earlier at the construction company office. He needed to investigate Frank's actions without raising suspicion. While rummaging through old accounting spreadsheets, he found something disturbing: several invoices for construction materials with incompatible values. "Ted?" Frank's voice surprised him. "What are you doing here so early?" "We need to talk, cousin," Ted replied, without taking his eyes off the documents. "About Irene, about these strange numbers, about everything." Frank's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Ted threw the spreadsheets on the table. "Then explain to me why we're paying for premium materials and using second-rate materials in our constructions." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice trembling. "You don't understand, Ted. Times are tough. We needed to cut costs." "Cut costs?" Ted exploded. "Putting lives at risk, destroying families like Irene's." At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was Isabella. "Ted, come home now." Her voice was choked with emotion. "Lily has a high fever. She won't stop calling for her mother." The businessman felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. In just 1 week, that little girl had become as important as his own son. "I'm coming," he replied, grabbing his jacket. Before leaving, he turned to Frank. "This isn't over, cousin. Tomorrow I want all the information about Irene and a complete report on these embezzlements." What Ted didn't know was that same night, Frank would do something desperate that would change the course of all their lives. In his office, alone, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Harmony Creek Gazette. I have a tip about Ted Barrett." The headline of the Harmony Creek Gazette blared in bold letters. "Millionaire businessman accused of holding needy child captive." Isabella dropped the newspaper from her trembling hands as she read the anonymous accusations that suggested Ted had bought Lily from her missing mother. The phone didn't stop ringing at the Barrett mansion. Reporters, social workers, and even curious neighbors wanted to know the truth about the girl who was now sleeping in the pink room, still feverish, unaware of the storm brewing around her. "How can they invent a lie like that?" Isabella whispered, sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, placing a damp cloth on her hot forehead. The girl was delirious, calling for her mother in restless dreams. In the living room, Ted paced back and forth, phone glued to his ear. "I don't care what you need to do, George," he said to his lawyer. "Find Irene. Today." Miles watched everything, from the top of the stairs, hugging his favorite teddy bear. For the first time in his 4 years of life, he felt real fear. Not the silly fear of monsters under the bed, but a real fear of losing something he didn't even know he wanted to keep, his new family. In Lily's room, something unexpected happened. Between one delirium and another, the girl grabbed Isabella's hand tightly. "Aunt Isa," she murmured, her eyes half closed with fever. "Sing that star song you sang yesterday." Isabella felt her heart clench. It was the lullaby she used to sing to Miles when he was a baby, before depression stole her voice. It had been years since she had sung to anyone. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," she began, her voice hoarse from disuse. Tears streamed silently down her face as she sang, remembering all the nights she had refused to sing to her own son, trapped in her pain. From the hallway, Miles listened, hugging his bear even tighter. He vaguely remembered that melody, like a distant dream. Without making a sound, he entered the room and sat on the floor, next to the bed. Lily opened her eyes slightly when she heard his footsteps. "Miles," she called weakly, "lie down here next to me. I'm scared." The boy looked at his mother, silently asking for permission. Isabella nodded, helping him get into the bed. Miles lay down next to Lily and, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including himself, offered her his favorite bear. "Teddy scares away the fear," he explained seriously. "He always works for me." Downstairs, Ted received an unexpected visit. Frank had appeared unannounced, his face marked by deep, dark circles. "We need to talk, cousin," he said, entering, without waiting for an invitation. "Things have gotten out of control." "Out of control?" Ted laughed humorlessly. "You planted a defamatory story in the newspaper, sent social, workers after us, and now you say things have gotten out of control." "That's not what I planned." Frank ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "It was just to scare you, to make you stop investigating the construction company. But now what?" Ted's voice was dangerously calm. "The police are investigating other cases," Frank almost whispered. "Other employees who were unfairly accused, other embezzlements of material. If this comes to light, Ted, it's not just me who goes down. The whole company will sink." Upstairs, oblivious to the tense conversation, Isabella continued singing. Her voice grew stronger with each verse, as if each word returned a little of the color that depression had stolen from her life. It was then that Lily, between fever and lucidity, began to speak. "Mommy used to sing to me too," she said, clutching Miles's teddy bear. "Every night after work at the hotel, she'd come home tired, but she always sang, until that day." Isabella stopped singing, her heart racing. It was the first time Lily had spoken about the day she lost her mother. "What day, honey?" she asked, softly. "The day the rich lady yelled." Lily closed her eyes tightly, as if trying to ward off the memory. "She had hair like yours, Aunt Isa, all blonde. She was wearing a red dress. I saw when she threw the necklace in the toilet, but no one believed me because I'm little." Isabella felt her blood run cold. She knew only one person who fit that description: Regina Bennett, wife of one of the largest investors in the Barretts construction company. Downstairs, the argument between the cousins reached its peak. "Are you telling me," Ted grabbed Frank by the collar, "that Regina Bennett and you framed an innocent cleaner to hide your embezzlements?" "It was her idea," Frank defended himself. "Regina discovered the irregularities in the constructions and threatened to tell her husband. She said she'd only keep quiet if you what?" "If I helped her get rid of Irene." The cleaner had seen Regina with her lover at the hotel. She needed a reason to discredit the woman. The sound of something breaking interrupted the confession. On the stairs, Isabella stood frozen, the shards of a water glass scattered at her feet. "Regina," her voice trembled, Regina Bennett? The same Regina who comes to have tea here every Thursday, who comforted me when I was depressed, who said she was my best friend. The silence that followed was deafening. Upstairs, Lily's voice called for Isabella, the fever returning with force. Ted, Isabella straightened her shoulders, a new determination in her eyes. Call Regina. Tell her we need to talk, now. At that moment, something changed in Isabella. The fragile woman who hid in her room gave way to a lioness protecting her cub, because now Lily was hers too, not by blood ties, but by something much stronger, by choice. What no one knew was that same night, as a storm brewed in the Harmony Creek sky, another person would arrive in town. A weary woman, with hands calloused from so much work and a heart broken with longing. Irene was coming back, and her arrival would change everything. "Daughter," she whispered, looking at Lily's photo in the newspaper she had found by chance. "Mommy's coming back." The rain lashed against the windows of the Barrett mansion when the doorbell rang. Regina Bennett, impeccable in her red dress and high heels, entered as if she owned the house, her French perfume leaving a trail in the air. She stopped when she saw Frank sitting on the sofa, his face paling slightly. "What a pleasant surprise," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't know we'd have a business meeting today." "It's not a business meeting, Regina." Isabella's voice cut through the air like a knife. She descended the stairs slowly, a visible transformation in her posture. She was no longer the fragile woman who hid in her room. She was a lioness, protecting her cub. "Isabella, darling, you're different," Regina smiled, but her eyes betrayed her nervousness. "Finally coming out of that depression? I always said it was just a phase." "A phase?" Isabella laughed humorlessly. "Like your phase of encounters at the Spring Hotel." Regina's smile froze. Her eyes flew to Frank, who studied the floor as if his life depended on it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, you do," Ted spoke up, rising from his armchair. "Just as you know about a certain necklace that you threw away yourself to incriminate an innocent cleaner." Upstairs, Miles continued to be beside Lily, who now slept more peacefully, the fever finally subsiding. The teddy bear was firmly clasped against her chest. The boy watched his friend sleep, a serious expression on his round little face. "I promise that no one will ever make you cry again," he whispered, holding her hand. In the living room, the confrontation continued. "You have no proof," Regina hissed, her mask of elegance beginning to crack. "We don't need proof," Isabella approached, her eyes flashing. "We have a witness, a small witness, that you didn't know existed." Regina's face lost all color. "The girl, the cleaner's daughter?" "Yes, Regina," Ted intervened. "The same girl you left orphaned for weeks, living on the street, eating scraps of garbage, all to protect your affair." "It wasn't like that," Regina exploded, tears of rage streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Frank assured me that the girl would be taken to a shelter. I never wanted..." "Never wanted what?" Isabella's voice was dangerously calm. "To destroy a family, to separate a mother from her daughter, all this while coming here week after week, pretending to be my friend, watching me sink into depression." The silence that followed was broken by a deafening thunderclap. And then, as if the universe had a perfect sense of timing, the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, ran to answer it. At the door, soaked by the rain, stood a thin woman with deep, dark circles and calloused hands. Her eyes, however, shone with a fierce determination. "My name is Irene," she said, her voice trembling. "I've come to get my daughter." The chaos that followed was instantaneous. Regina tried to escape through the back door, but Ted stopped her. Frank began to cry, confessing all the schemes of embezzlement of materials. Isabella ran upstairs, her heart divided between protecting Lily and letting her reunite with her mother. In the room, Lily woke up with the noise. "What was that, Aunt Isa?" Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. How to explain to a 6-year-old that her mother, after weeks of separation, was downstairs? It was Miles who resolved the situation. "Come on," he said, taking Lily's hand. "I think there's a surprise for you downstairs." The two children descended the stairs hand in hand, Miles holding tight so that Lily, still weak from the fever, wouldn't fall. When they reached the last step, time seemed to freeze. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was just a whisper. "My daughter!" Irene opened her arms, tears streaming freely down her face. The embrace between mother and daughter made everyone in the room stop. Regina, who was still trying to justify herself, fell silent. Frank swallowed a sob. Ted held Isabella's hand tightly, which was trembling, but it was Miles's reaction that surprised everyone. The boy, still holding Lily's hand, didn't let go even during the embrace. When Irene finally pulled away to look at her daughter, she noticed the little boy clinging to her hand. "And who are you?" Irene asked softly. "I'm Miles," he replied seriously. I take care of Lily now." Irene looked at her daughter, noticing for the first time the changes, the clean dress, the well-combed hair, the teddy bear firmly clasped against her chest. Her eyes met Isabella's, who had come down the stairs and now stood next to her son. "Was it you?" Irene asked. "Was it you who took care of my girl?" Before Isabella could answer, Regina stepped forward. "Irene," her voice trembled, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean—" "You!" Irene interrupted her, recognizing her immediately. "The lady from the hotel?" The silence that followed was heavy. Lily squeezed Miles's hand tighter, who returned the squeeze. "Mommy," Lily said softly, "Aunt Regina threw her necklace in the toilet. I saw." The girl's words, simple and direct, fell like lightning in the room. Regina covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Frank finally raised his eyes from the floor. "I confess everything," he said, his voice broken. "The embezzlement of material, the false accusation, everything. But please, don't let my wife and children pay for my mistakes." Ted looked at his cousin with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Did you think about Irene's wife and children when you falsely accused her?" It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Miles let go of Lily's hand and walked to Regina. "You made Lily cry," he said, his childish voice filled with surprising seriousness. "You're a bad person." The boy's words, in their childish simplicity, were like a slap in Regina's face. She fell to her knees, her red dress spreading across the floor like a pool of blood. "Forgive me," she sobbed, looking at Irene. "Forgive me, please." But before anyone could answer, a noise of sirens cut through the rainy night. Through the windows of the mansion, red and blue lights illuminated the garden. The police had arrived, and with them, a new twist was about to happen in the lives of the inhabitants of that house. Detective Martinez entered the Barrett mansion with a grave expression on his face. Behind him, 2 investigators carried folders full of documents. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of rain on the windows and Regina's stifled sobs. "Mr. Theodore Barrett?" asked the detective, his eyes scanning the unusual scene before him. A woman in a red dress kneeling on the floor, a visibly disturbed man on the sofa, a humble lady hugging a girl, and a little boy in pajamas who stared at him with defiant eyes. "That's me," Ted replied, stepping forward. "And I imagine you're here because of the tip about the girl." "Actually," the detective cleared his throat, "we're here for something much bigger. We received an anonymous tip about a scheme of embezzlement of materials in your constructions, and now, seeing Mrs. Regina Bennett here—" Regina raised her head sharply when she heard her name. "What's going on?" Mrs. Bennet continued, the detective. Your husband is at the police station right now. He found your messages with Mr. Frank and decided to cooperate with the investigation. Regina's face turned even paler. Carlos reported, yes, confirmed the detective, and he brought evidence not only of the embezzlements, but also of the case of harassment against Mrs. Irene dos Santos. Irene, who until then had watched everything in silence, squeezed Lily tighter in her arms. The girl, in turn, stared at Isabella, who had instinctively approached. Detective, Ted intervened, before anything else, I need you to know that my wife and I are taking care of Lily with the sole purpose of helping. There was never... I know that, the detective interrupted him with a small smile. In fact, we received several statements from residents of downtown who witnessed the day you found the girl. In fact, your attitude was praised by Child Protective Services. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Miles, who had stayed close to Lily even with the arrival of the police, finally relaxed his shoulders. However, continued the detective, his expression returning to being serious, we need everyone's statements, especially yours, Mrs. Irene. Lily grabbed her mother's hand tightly. Don't let them take you away again, Mommy. No one's going to take your mother, honey. Isabella approached, kneeling beside the two. This time, she's going to tell the truth, and everyone will listen. It was then that Miles did something surprising. He walked to his mother and tugged at her sleeve. Mom, he said, his voice small but determined, show them. Show them what, son? Isabella asked, confused. The painting, he replied. The painting you painted of Lily. Isabella held her breath. In the previous week, during a sleepless night, she had started painting again for the first time in years. The theme, Lily's sleeping embrace to Miles's teddy bear. The canvas was hidden in her old studio, covered by a cloth. Why the painting, son? Asked Ted, intrigued by the boy's suggestion. Because. Miles took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something very important. Mommy only paints who she truly loves. She told me that once. The boy's words hit everyone like a wave. Isabella started to cry. Ted held her hand tightly, and even the detective seemed moved. Get the painting, Mrs. Isabella, he asked gently. I think we all need to see this. As Isabella went upstairs, supported by Ted, Regina finally got up from the floor. Her face was stained with makeup, but there was a new expression in her eyes. Irene, she called, her voice trembling, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know. Carlos and I don't have children. For years we tried, we did treatments and nothing. Seeing you with Lily, your connection, I think I was blinded by envy. And when I discovered Frank's embezzlements, you used me, completed Irene, her voice firm. Used my daughter, separated us. Yes, Regina lowered her eyes. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to fix that. At that moment, Isabella returned, carrying a large canvas. When she removed the cloth that covered it, everyone fell silent. The painting showed Lily sleeping, but it wasn't just a portrait. Isabella had captured something deeper, the peace on the girl's face, the way her fingers held the bear, the soft shadows of the room. And most impressively, she had painted a window in the background where you could see a starry sky that was very reminiscent of Van Gogh's The Starry Night. It's like you said, Isabella whispered to Lily, the sky is dancing. The detective cleared his throat, visibly moved. Well, I think that makes it clear what kind of environment the girl found here. Mrs. Irene, do you have anything to say? Irene looked long at the painting, then at Isabella, and finally at her daughter. Lily was smiling, a real smile that she hadn't seen on her little girl's face for a long time. Yes, I do, she finally replied. I want to thank you. Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I couldn't, for giving her what I never managed to give her. But now you're going to take me away, right? Lily asked, her voice small. The silence that followed was deafening. All the adults exchanged glances, the same unspoken question hanging in the air. What would happen now? It was then that Miles once again surprised everyone. "Why can't Lily and Aunt Irene live here?" he asked, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The house is big. There are lots of empty rooms." Ted and Isabella exchanged glances. The same thought occurred to both simultaneously. But before they could say anything, the detective intervened. "Unfortunately, it's not that simple," he said. "We still have a lot to resolve. The investigation of the embezzlements, the statements. And there's one more thing," added one of the investigators, leafing through a folder. "We found something about Mrs. Irene that needs to be clarified immediately." Everyone held their breath. What new secret was about to be revealed? The investigator removed a yellow document from his folder. "Mrs. Irene dos Santos, according to our records, you completed 3 years of education at Ohio State University, but abandoned the course in the last year. Is that correct?" Irene paled, her hands instinctively tightening on Lily's shoulders. How did you find that out?" "Mommy?" Lily looked up, confused. "You were going to be a teacher." Irene's face contorted in an expression of old pain. "I was, honey. It was my dream, but then you found out you were pregnant," completed the investigator, consulting his notes. "And the child's father, your supervising professor, refused to acknowledge paternity." A heavy silence fell over the room. Regina, who until then had remained quiet in a corner, let out a small sigh of surprise. Ted and Isabella exchanged meaningful glances. "Is that why you went to work as a cleaner?" Isabella asked softly, approaching Irene. "Yes," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "No one wanted to hire a single pregnant student. The hotel, it was the only place that accepted me." "But that changes everything," exclaimed Detective Martinez, surprising everyone. "Mrs. Irene, you have almost complete academic training. That means that she can work on the social program that I'm going to create in the construction company," interrupted Ted, his eyes shining with a sudden idea. "An education program for employees and their children." Irene looked at him, astonished. You're offering me a job?" "No," replied Ted, a smile forming on his face. "I'm offering you to resume your dream." Miles, who had remained quiet, watching everything, tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, does that mean Lily will be able to stay?" "Well," Ted looked at Irene, "that depends on her mother." At that moment, Mrs. Jenkins entered the room carrying a tray with tea and cookies. The housekeeper, who had remained discreetly in the back of the house throughout the confusion, seemed to have something important to say. "Excuse me," she began, her voice firm despite her age, "but I think I have a suggestion." Everyone turned to the gray-haired lady who, for 20 years, had practically raised Ted and now helped raise Miles. "The guest house where I live," she continued, "is too big for an old woman alone. It has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a little backyard, and it's less than 50 yards from the mansion." Isabella's eyes widened, understanding immediately. "Mrs. Jenkins, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that it's time for me to retire," completed the housekeeper with a smile. "My sister in Clearwater is calling me for years to live with her, and the house would be perfect for Irene and Lily." "But Mrs. Jenkins," protested Ted, "you're practically family." "And that's why I'm making this suggestion," she replied, winking. "Family takes care of family." Lily, who had followed the conversation in silence, suddenly let go of her mother's hand and ran to Miles, whispering something in his ear. The boy's eyes widened and he nodded vigorously. "What are you two whispering about?" asked Isabella. Noticing the exchange, "Lily had an idea," announced Miles, his voice overflowing with enthusiasm. "She said that if they live in Mrs. Jenkins's house, she can continue studying with me and with you, Aunt Isa, and Aunt Irene can teach us too." Detective Martinez cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. Well, from a legal point of view, I don't see any impediments. In fact, with Mrs. Irene employed and having a fixed residence, it greatly facilitates the process against Regina and Frank. Regina, who had remained extraordinarily quiet, finally spoke up. Detective, I want to confess everything. Not only about Irene, but about all the other employees I harmed, and I want to help fix things. What do you mean, other employees? Questioned Ted, his face hardening. Irene wasn't the first, admitted Regina, her voice trembling. There were others. Other people who threatened to expose my affair with me, completed Frank, speaking for the first time in a long time. Regina and we got involved 2 years ago, and we started using the construction company's embezzlements to keep our affair a secret. Isabella staggered, needing to lean on an armchair. 2 years? All that time you came to visit me, to console me for depression? I felt guilty, sobbed Regina, seeing you suffering while I... Enough! Ted's voice thundered through the room. Enough lies, enough manipulation. Detective, take them both. They have a lot to explain at the police station. As the police handcuffed Regina and Frank, Lily approached Isabella, who was still sitting in the armchair, looking dazed. Aunt Isa, she called softly, are you still going to teach me to paint? Isabella looked at the girl, then at the painting she had painted, still displayed on the easel. A trembling smile began to form on her lips. I will, honey. And you know what? I think you're going to teach me much more than I can teach you. At that moment, as the rain finally began to subside outside, something new began to form inside that house. It wasn't a traditional family, it wasn't a common arrangement, but it was something equally precious. It was a second chance for everyone. Miles, watching his mother hug Lily while talking to Irene about class schedules and plans for the future, felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't jealousy like before. It was something different, something warm and good. Dad, he called, tugging on Ted's sleeve. This that I'm feeling here, he pointed to his own chest. Is it brotherly love? Ted knelt beside his son, his eyes watering. I think it is, son. I think it is. But not all the problems were solved. As the police led Regina and Frank out, the investigator who had revealed Irene's past remained behind, still leafing through his folder. There's one more thing, he said, his face serious. Something about Irene's old professor. The investigator adjusted his glasses, staring at Irene. Professor Robert Mendonca wasn't just your advisor, he was also the coordinator of the university's social project. And according to our records, he embezzled significant funds from the program in the months leading up to your departure from college. Irene staggered, needing to lean on a nearby chair. What, Robert? He was stealing money from the project. Not only that, continued the investigator, we discovered that he had a pattern. Several scholarship students abandoned the course during his tenure, all pregnant, all alone. Irene's face turned pale. Lily, noticing her mother's discomfort, ran to hug her. Mommy, you're shaking, said the girl, worried. Isabella immediately approached, putting a protective arm around Irene. She needs a glass of water, Ted. But before anyone could move, Irene raised her hand, asking for silence. Her expression had changed, the fragility giving way to a fierce determination. How many? She asked, her voice firm. How many other women did he deceive? We identified 7 cases in the last 10 years, replied the investigator, but we suspect there are more. Ted, who had remained silent, processing the information, stepped forward. And where is this man now? That's the most interesting part. The investigator smiled slightly. He's a visiting professor at a private university here in Harmony Creek. In fact, he's one of the main investors in Mr. Frank's construction company. Now what? Ted almost shouted. Robert Mendonca is my cousin's partner. Not directly, explained the investigator. He uses shell companies. The money embezzled from the university was laundered through these companies and invested in overvalued constructions. Miles, who was playing absent-mindedly with Lily in a corner of the room, suddenly stopped, his eyes wide, fixed on something through the window. "Dad!" he called, his voice trembling. "There's a man spying outside." Everyone turned sharply to the window. For a moment, they could see a male figure moving quickly away through the garden. "It's him!" exclaimed Irene, her face pale. "It's Robert!" Detective Martinez immediately activated his radio, ordering his patrol cars to surround the block. But Ted was already in motion, running to the back door. "Ted, no!" shouted Isabella, but it was too late. The chase that followed through the garden of the mansion was tense. Robert, a middle-aged man with grey hair and an expensive suit, ran with the ease of someone who was used to escaping problems. But Ted, moved by a rage that he didn't even know he possessed, was faster. When he finally caught up with him near the back gate, the scene that followed surprised everyone who watched from the windows of the mansion. "Please don't turn me in," pleaded Robert, panting. "I can explain everything." "Explain?" Ted grabbed the man by the collar. "Explain how you destroyed the lives of innocent women, how you stole money intended to help people in need." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Jenkins emerged from the guest house carrying a broom. "Mr. Robert?" she exclaimed, recognizing the man. "The professor who visited the hotel?" Everyone turned to the housekeeper, including Robert, who seemed to have seen a ghost. "Mrs. Jenkins," he stammered, You worked at the hotel." "I've worked here for 20 years, she replied, wielding the broom like a weapon. "But before, I cleaned the hotel on my days off. And I remember you very well, always talking to the younger employees." The revelation fell like a bomb. Irene, who had followed Ted to the garden along with the detective, stepped forward. "So it wasn't a coincidence that I got the job at the hotel," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You followed me. You stalked me." "Irene, my love," Robert tried to smile. "You know that what we had was special." "Never again!" she shouted, tears of anger streaming down her face. "Never call me that again!" From the window of the mansion, Lily watched everything alongside Miles and Isabella. The girl held her friend's hand tightly, her eyes fixed on her. "Mother, Aunt Isa," she whispered, "why is the bad man making Mommy cry?" Isabella hugged the two children, trying to protect them from the scene unfolding outside. But Miles, with the unexpected wisdom that children sometimes demonstrate, answered first. "Sometimes," he said, "big people do bad things because they think no one will find out. Like I did with your shoes. But someone always finds out." Outside, Detective Martinez handcuffed Robert while reading him his rights. Ted had stepped away and was now beside Irene, who was visibly shaking. "It's over," he said softly. "He'll never hurt you or anyone else again." "It's not over," replied Irene, wiping away the tears. "There are still other women, other stories to tell, and we're going to find all of them," promised the detective. "Each of his victims will have a voice." Mrs. Jenkins approached Irene, still holding her broom. "Girl," she said with affection, "sometimes God closes a door to open a window. Just look at where you are now." As if to confirm the housekeeper's words, Lily chose this moment to run to her mother, followed closely by Miles. "Mommy," she called, hugging Irene's legs, "look what Miles gave me." In her small hands, Lily held a drawing. It was a painting made with watercolor, clearly the work of a child, but made with so much affection that it moved everyone who saw it. In the drawing, there were 6 figures: Ted, Isabella, Miles, Lily, Irene, and Mrs. Jenkins, all holding hands in front of 2 houses, the mansion and the guest house. In the sky, dancing stars resembled Van Gogh's The Starry Night. "I Helped him with the stars, said Lily proudly, like Aunt Isa taught me. Irene took the drawing with trembling hands, her eyes watering now for a different reason. There, on that simple paper painted by two children, was the promise of a future that she had never dared to dream. But while everyone admired the drawing, no one noticed the strange look that Robert gave to the mansion before being placed in the patrol car, a look that suggested that there were still more secrets to be revealed. The first week after Robert's arrest brought significant changes for everyone in the Barrett mansion. Irene and Lily settled in the guest house, which Ted made a point of completely renovating before Mrs. Jenkins moved out. The housekeeper, before leaving for Clearwater, spent 3 whole days teaching Irene all the secrets of the main house, including each resident's quirks. "The boy, Miles," she explained as they organized Irene's new kitchen, "only eats the omelette if the cheese is completely melted. And Mrs. Isabella, poor thing, on bad days she needs chamomile tea with 2 spoons of honey." But it was on a seemingly common morning that something unusual happened. Isabella was in her newly reopened studio, giving Lily and Miles their first painting lesson when the phone rang. "Mrs. Barrett?" The voice on the other end was hesitant. "This is Anna Claire. From the university. I saw in the newspapers about Professor Robert." Isabella felt her heart race. "You're one of—" "Yes," the voice choked. "I was a student of his 8 years ago, and I have a child." The brush Isabella was holding fell, staining the floor blue. Lily, who was focused on painting her first canvas, looked at her teacher in alarm. "Aunt Isa," she called, worried, "you're white as a ghost." Miles, who already knew the signs of his mother's anxiety, immediately ran to get the chamomile tea from the kitchen. But Isabella, for the first time, didn't need the calming drink. Something stronger moved her now. "Anna Claire," she said, her voice firm, "you need to meet Irene." The meeting that took place that afternoon at the Barrett mansion would forever change the course of the story. Anna Claire didn't come alone. With her, 5 other women, all with similar stories, all carrying in their eyes the same weight that Irene had carried for years. "You're not alone anymore," declared Ted, observing the group gathered in his living room. "The Barrett Construction Company will create a support fund for all of you and your children." "We don't want charity," protested one of the women, Marina, who had abandoned her civil engineering course in her last year. "It's not charity," interrupted Irene, who until then had watched everything in silence. "It's justice. And besides," she smiled for the first time since Robert had been arrested, "I have a proposal for you." That's how Project Phoenix was born. Using the money recovered from Robert and Frank's embezzlements, Ted and Irene created a scholarship program so that all the women could complete their degrees. More than that, the project offered free daycare for their children and employment opportunities at the construction company after graduation. "But there's one condition," explained Irene, her eyes shining with determination. "Each of us, after graduating, will need to help other women who have gone through similar situations." In the garden, oblivious to the serious conversations of the adults, Lily and Miles played under the supervision of Mrs. Jenkins, who had postponed her departure to help with the transition. "Miles," called Lily, pointing to a blue butterfly that had landed on a flower. "Look, it's just like the one in your drawing." The boy smiled, proud. Since starting painting lessons with his mother, his drawings had improved a lot, but something bothered him. "Lily," he said, hesitant, "aren't you sad that your father was a bad man?" The girl stopped watching the butterfly, her little face assuming a serious expression that seemed much older than her 6 years. "He's not my father," she replied simply. "Father is who takes care of you, just like your father takes care of me and Mommy." Mrs. Jenkins, who pretended not to hear the conversation while watering the plants, discreetly wiped away a tear. Inside the house, the meeting continued. Anna Claire had brought important documents, records of meetings, emails, proof of bank transfers, evidence that could keep Robert in prison for a long time. "There's one more thing," she said, hesitant. "Robert, he didn't act alone. There was a woman who helped him, someone from the university administration." Ted, who was signing the papers for the support fund, raised his head sharply. "What woman?" "The vice president," replied Anna Claire. "Sophia Mendonca." "Mendonca?" Isabella frowned. "Is she related to him?" "Ex-wife," explained Marina. "She knew everything. She always knew. In fact, she was the one who chose the students for the social project scholarships. Always girls from poor families, always vulnerable." The silence that followed was heavy. Ted picked up his phone, quickly dialing Detective Martinez's number. But before he could complete the call, a commotion in the garden caught everyone's attention. Lily ran into the room, her eyes wide with fear. "Aunt Isa, Uncle Ted," she shouted. "There's a woman taking Miles." Panic was instantaneous. Everyone ran to the garden, only to see a black car speeding away. Mrs. Jenkins was lying on the ground, a red mark on her forehead. "Miles!" Isabella's scream cut through the air like a knife. Ted was already running to his car, the phone glued to his ear, shouting orders to the police, but it was Irene who noticed first. "The car," she said, her voice trembling. "It's the same one that was parked in front of the university. It's her car, Sophia's." The next hours were a nightmare. While Mrs. Jenkins was being treated by paramedics, fortunately she only had a bump on her head, the police mounted a search operation. Isabella was in shock, needing tranquilizers to avoid collapsing completely. It was Lily who once again surprised everyone. "I know where he is," she said suddenly amidst the chaos. All the adults stopped, looking at the little girl, who nervously squeezed the hem of her dress. "How do you know, honey?" asked Irene, kneeling beside her. "Miles showed me yesterday," explained Lily. "There's a secret place he discovered. It's near the old hotel, the one where Mommy used to work. He said it was going to be our special hiding place if something bad happened." Ted and Detective Martinez exchanged meaningful glances. The Spring Hotel, where everything had begun, had been abandoned since the investigations into the embezzlement of material began. "Sophia must be desperate," reasoned the detective. "With Robert arrested and the investigations advancing, she must have thought of using Miles as a bargaining chip." "But why the hotel?" questioned Isabella, her voice weak. "Because there," replied Irene, her eyes shining with understanding, "is where they kept all the documents. I cleaned their special room, remember? The one that was always locked." A plan began to form. But no one expected that the most important person for its success would be precisely the smallest of all present. The Spring Hotel, once one of the most luxurious establishments in Harmony Creek, now stood as a dark structure against the twilight sky. Its dusty windows reflected the last rays of sun, while police cars positioned themselves discreetly in the adjacent streets. "Are you sure you want to do this, Lily?" asked Isabella for the third time, nervously adjusting the small listening device on the girl's dress. "Yes, Aunt Isa," replied Lily with a surprising determination for her 6 years. "Miles is my best friend. He helped me when I was alone. Now it's my turn to help him." Irene, who watched the scene with a heavy heart, hugged her daughter tightly. "My love, you don't need to do this. The police can—" "No, Mommy," interrupted Lily. "The bad lady will only believe it if it's me. Miles told me that this is our special place, only ours." The plan was risky, but simple. Lily would enter the hotel alone, pretending to look for Miles in his secret hideout. Sophia, who did not know the girl personally, would not know that she was collaborating with the police. "Remember what we agreed?" asked Detective Martinez gently. "You just need to—" "I know," said Lily, surprising everyone with her maturity. "I just need to make the bad lady talk about the hidden papers and about Uncle Robert. And I need to make Miles understand that it's time for our secret code." The secret code had been the idea of the children themselves, created during their games in recent weeks. When one of them said, "The stars are dancing," it was a signal to run to the safe place that only the two knew. Ted, who had remained silent until then, knelt in front of Lily. "You're very brave, little one, just like your mother." The girl smiled, that pure smile that had conquered everyone since the first day. "Uncle Ted, promise you'll take care of Aunt Isa while I look for Miles. She's shaking a lot." Isabella let out a muffled sob as she heard the girl's words. How could a child who had suffered so much have so much compassion? The sun was almost setting when Lily began her walk to the entrance of the hotel. Her blue dress, chosen especially for the occasion for being the same as the one she wore in Isabella's painting, swayed gently with the breeze. "Miles!" Her childish voice echoed through the dusty lobby. "Are you here? I came to play in our secret place." On the third floor, where Robert's old office was, Sophia Mendonca held Miles's hand tightly. The boy, although scared, maintained a defiant expression that was very reminiscent of his father. "Shut up, kid," whispered Sophia when Miles tried to answer Lily's call. "If you make any noise." "Lily will find me," replied Miles with surprising confidence. "She always finds me." In the lobby, Lily continued her acting. "Miles, remember when we found that room full of papers? The one your mom said looked like a rat's nest?" Sophia tensed upon hearing the mention of the documents. It was exactly there that they were, hidden behind a false panel that not even the police had found during the initial searches. "This pest knows about the documents," she muttered to herself, her face contorted with anger. Miles took advantage of the moment of distraction to kick Sophia in the shin. The woman stifled a cry of pain, but before she could retaliate, Lily's voice sounded closer. "I found a drawing of you here, Miles. There's a star dancing on it." The boy's eyes widened as he recognized the code. Without thinking twice, he bit Sophia's hand and ran towards the door. "Lily!" he shouted. "The stars are dancing!" Chaos was installed in a matter of seconds. Sophia, recovered from the initial shock, ran after Miles, but the boy had already disappeared down the service staircase, exactly the path he and Lily had planned during their secret explorations. "Come on!" shouted Sophia, now in panic. "They know about the documents! We have to!" But there was no one to hear her cries. She was alone. Robert was arrested, Frank had confessed everything, and now her last vestiges of power trickled through, her fingers like sand. On the ground floor, Lily found Miles exactly where they had agreed, behind the old deactivated fountain in the inner garden. The two children hugged each other tightly. "You came to save me," whispered Miles, tears streaming down his face. "Always," replied Lily with simplicity. The sound of hurried footsteps made the children huddle even more in their hiding place. Sophia descended the stairs, running, her high heels echoing through the empty lobby. "Where are you, you little pests?" she shouted, her face red with rage. "You're not going to ruin everything, not after so long." It was then that a familiar voice cut through the air. "Looking for this, Sophia?" Irene stood at the entrance of the hotel holding a yellow folder. Beside her, Isabella wielded the painting she had painted of Lily. "How?" Sophia stammered, recognizing the documents that were supposed to be hidden on the third floor. "You forgot that I knew every corner of this hotel," replied Irene, her voice laden with a strength she had never shown before. "Including the hiding, places you and Robert used for your dirty schemes. And you forgot," added Isabella, "that children are much smarter than adults imagine." As if to confirm her words, Miles and Lily emerged from their hiding place not by the fountain, but through a small service door behind the reception desk. An escape route that only they knew. Sophia, realizing she was cornered, tried to run to the back exit, but there, blocking her path, was Ted. "It's over, Sophia," he said simply. The woman still attempted one last bluff. "You have no proof." "Yes, we do," interrupted Detective Martinez, entering through the front door with his investigators. "Your conversation with the children was all recorded. And now we also have the original documents of the embezzlements." While Sophia was being handcuffed, Miles ran into his mother's arms. Isabella hugged him tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. "My son," she sobbed, "my brave son." "Mom," said Miles, still hugged to her, "I wasn't afraid. Lily taught me to be strong." Lily, who watched the scene hugged to her own mother, smiled. "And you taught me to be brave, Miles." At that moment, as the sun finally set on the Harmony Creek horizon, something extraordinary happened. The last ray of light passing through the dusty windows of the hotel created a pattern of light and shadow on the floor that was very reminiscent of the dancing stars in Van Gogh's painting. But the night was not over yet. At the police station, Sophia began to talk, revealing a scheme much larger than anyone could imagine. And in his cell, Robert Mendonca received an unexpected visit that would change the course of that story once again. The Harmony Creek police station was in an uproar that night. In the two interrogation rooms, Sophia Mendonca and Robert faced different but equally intense questioning. In the first room, Sophia crumbled before the evidence. "It was his idea," she sobbed, smeared makeup staining her face. "Robert always knew how to manipulate people. When we got married, I was just an assistant professor like the others that he—" Detective Martinez raised his hand, interrupting her. "Mrs. Mendonca, are you saying that you were also a victim of Mr. Robert?" "In the beginning, yes," she replied, her eyes taking on a strange glow. "But then I realized that I could use the system to my advantage. The scholarship students, the embezzlements, it all became a power game." In the next room, Robert faced an unexpected visitor. Carlos Bennett, Regina's husband, and one of the main investors in the construction company. "You have one last chance to do the right thing," said Carlos, his voice laden with a threatening calm. "Tell me everything about the university's social project." Robert laughed, a humorless sound. "And why would I do that? You don't have clean hands either, Bennett. The overvalued investments, the fraudulent bids." "The difference," interrupted Carlos, "is that I have already confessed everything. And more importantly, I didn't destroy families. I didn't separate mothers from their children." Outside the police station in the waiting room, Ted and Isabella waited with the children. Miles slept in his mother's arms, exhausted after the day's events, while Lily calmly colored a book that a policewoman had lent her. "Uncle Ted," she called suddenly, raising her eyes from the drawing, "why do adults do bad things?" Ted felt his heart clench. How to explain the complexity of human evil to a 6-year-old who had already experienced so much of it? "Sometimes," he began carefully, "people get lost along the way. They forget what's really important. Just like you forgot Aunt Isa when you only thought about working," Lily asked innocently. The question hit Ted like a punch in the stomach. Isabella, who caressed Miles's hair, looked up surprised. "Yeah," he replied after a moment, "exactly like that. But do you know what the difference is?" "What?" asked Lily, abandoning her drawing. "The difference is that I realized my mistake in time, and I had special people who helped me get back on the right track. Just like Miles and I helped today?" The girl's eyes shone. "Yes, my love," replied Isabella, silent tears streaming down her face. "Exactly like you helped today." At that moment, Irene returned from the public phone in the hall. Her face was pale. "What is it, Irene?" asked Ted, noting her expression. "Anna Claire just called," she replied, sitting down heavily. "She found more documents. It wasn't just university students. The scheme, it was much bigger. Before they could discuss further, Detective Martinez came out of the interrogation room, his face etched with worry. "Folks," he called, "I think you'd better see this." In the room, Sophia had stopped crying. Her face now displayed an almost manic expression. "Want to know the truth?" she asked when everyone entered. "The truth is that Robert and I created a perfect system. We identified vulnerable girls, offered scholarships, employment at the hotel, all part of a bigger plan." "What plan?" asked Irene, her voice trembling. "Control," replied Sophia simply. "The more desperate the person, the easier it is to control them. The pregnant students were just one part. There were also the hotel employees, the secretaries at the construction company. That's why you tried to kidnap Miles," interrupted Isabella, understanding. "It wasn't just about the documents. It was to maintain control. It was to keep everything working," exploded Sophia. "Years of work, an entire network of influence and power, all threatened because of a cleaner and her daughter." In the other room, through the mirrored glass, Carlos watched the interrogation with a somber expression. Beside him, Robert had lost all his arrogance. "She's gone crazy," he murmured. "Sophia has always been obsessive about control, but this got out of hand. Just like your obsession with destroying innocent lives?" asked Carlos coldly. In the hall, Lily had slipped away from the waiting room, following the adults. Standing at the door of the interrogation room, she watched Sophia with an almost scientific curiosity. "You're like the lady in the red dress," she said suddenly, making everyone turn around. "You also like to make people cry." Sophia stared at the girl, her face contorting in a strange expression. You're Irene's daughter." "I am," replied Lily simply, "and you're the person who hurt my mum. But you know what?" "What?" asked Sophia, almost against her will. "Now my mum has a big family. There's Uncle Ted, Aunt Isa, Miles, and you're alone." The girl's words, in their brutal simplicity, had a devastating effect on Sophia. She began to laugh, a hysterical laugh that soon turned into sobs. "I had a daughter too," she confessed between tears. "A long time ago, but I lost her custody in the divorce with Robert. That's when I started wanting to control everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Ted hugged Isabella, who was visibly shaking. Irene pulled Lily closer to her, while Detective Martinez made notes furiously. "Where is your daughter now?" asked Isabella softly. "I don't know," replied Sophia, seeming to wither in her chair. "It's been 15 years since I saw her. Her name was—" But before she could complete the sentence, a noise in the next room caught everyone's attention. Robert had knocked over his chair, his face white as paper. "Don't!" he shouted through the wall. "Don't tell them about her. Don't destroy her life too." Carlos Bennett watched everything with an increasingly somber expression. "There's something bigger here," he murmured. "Something we haven't discovered yet." Back in the waiting room, Miles had woken up and now held Lily's hand tightly. "Is everything okay?" he asked, noticing his friend's thoughtful expression. "Yeah," she replied, returning to her drawing, "but I think there are more stars to dance yet." And she was right, because that same night, while Sophia and Robert were transferred to separate cells, a phone call would arrive at the police station. A phone call that would reveal the last and most shocking secret of that story. The phone call came to the police station exactly at midnight. Detective Martinez was about to end his shift when his secretary rushed into his office. "Detective, there's a young woman on the line. She says she's the daughter of Sophia and Robert." The silence in the room was absolute. Ted, who was signing his statement, raised his eyes surprised. Isabella, who rocked a sleeping Miles on a sofa, held her breath. "Put her on," ordered Martinez, turning on the speakerphone. "Hello?" A feminine voice, soft but firm, filled the room. My name is Beatrice Mendonca. I just saw on the online newspaper about the arrest of my parents. Irene, who played distractedly with Lily's hair, also asleep, approached the detective's desk. Mrs. Beatrice, began Martinez carefully, your mother mentioned that she hadn't had contact with you for 15 years. And she hadn't, replied Beatrice, but not by my choice. In fact, it was because of something I discovered when I was 16 years old. And what did you discover? Asked Carlos Bennett, who had remained at the police station after Robert's interrogation. I discovered that I wasn't an only child. Beatrice's voice trembled slightly. I discovered that my father had other daughters with the students, that he... Her voice failed. On the other end of the line, they could hear stifled sobs. When I confronted my mother, she continued after recomposing herself, I discovered something even worse. She knew. She always knew. And not only that, she started using this information to blackmail the women, to keep them under control. My God, whispered Isabella, hugging Miles tighter to her. There's more, said Beatrice. Much more. I have documents, records that my mother kept, birth certificates, DNA results, proof of payments to maintain silence. Detective Martinez began to take notes furiously. Mrs. Beatrice, we need these documents. I know, she replied. That's why I'm calling. I'm on my way to Harmony Creek. I'll be there in 2 hours. After hanging up the phone, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Lily, who apparently wasn't as asleep as she seemed, who broke the silence. Aunt Isa, she called, her voice sleepy. What's DNA? Isabella opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How to explain something so complex to a child? It's a type of special signature, replied Ted, surprising everyone with his simplicity. Something that shows which family we came from. Oh, said Lily, processing the information. So it's like the way Mommy and I have the same smile? That's right, my love, replied Irene, kissing her daughter's forehead. The next 2 hours were tense. Miles woke up and, realizing the heavy atmosphere, stuck to Lily like a shadow. The two children began a silent game of drawing stars on a paper, occasionally sharing knowing smiles. When Beatrice finally arrived at the police station, everyone was surprised. She was a young woman, about 30 years old, with the same penetrating eyes as Sophia, but there was a softness in her that her mother did not possess. You look tired, was the first thing that Lily said to her upon seeing her, making everyone hold their breath at her characteristic frankness. Beatrice surprisingly smiled. I am, little one. Carrying secrets for so long makes you very tired. She placed on the detective's desk a thick folder tied with a cord worn by time. Here's everything. 15 years of secrets, lies, and destroyed lives. While Detective Martinez and his investigators examined the documents, Beatrice sat in a corner of the room, watching Lily and Miles, who had returned to their drawings. You know, she said softly to Irene, who was nearby, seeing these children makes me think. To think about how things could have been different if my parents had chosen love instead of power. Isabella, who overheard the conversation, approached. It's never too late to choose love. No, agreed Beatrice, it isn't. That's why I'm here. I discovered that I have 5 half-sisters, 5 women who don't even know that there are others like them, 5 families who need to know the truth. Suddenly, a commotion in the next room caught everyone's attention. Sophia, who was being taken to her final cell, had escaped from the guards upon hearing her daughter's voice. Beatrice, she shouted, bursting into the room. My daughter! But Beatrice didn't move. She remained, seated, her eyes fixed on the mother she hadn't seen for 15 years. You don't have that right, she said calmly. You don't have the right to call me daughter after everything you've done. Sophia staggered as if she had been slapped. I did everything for you, to protect you, to give you a better life. No, interrupted Beatrice, her voice trembling slightly. You did everything for power, for control. Look at that girl over there, she pointed to Lily. Look what you did to her and her mother. Is that what a mother does? It was at that moment that Miles, surprising everyone again, got up and walked to Sophia. My mom said that when we do something wrong, he said, his childish voice filled with seriousness, we have to say sorry and try to fix it. Lily, following the example of her friend, also approached. And my mom said that forgiving makes the heart lighter. The children's words seemed to hit Sophia in a way that no accusation had managed to do. She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Forgive me, she whispered, looking at her daughter. Forgive me for having chosen wrong. So many times. Beatrice stood up slowly. It's not just me that you need to apologize to, Mom. It's all of them, all the lives that you and Dad destroyed. Detective Martinez, who had finished examining the documents, cleared his throat to call everyone's attention. Folks, he said, his face grave, I think we need to call all the women involved. They have the right to know the truth. But before anyone could respond, Lily let out an exclamation of surprise, pointing to the window of the police station. Look, she shouted, the stars are really dancing. Everyone turned to look. Outside, a rare spectacle unfolded in the Harmony Creek sky. A meteor shower cut through the darkness, creating luminous trails that really seemed to dance. It's a sign, whispered Irene, hugging her daughter. A sign that the truth always finds its way to the light, and while everyone watched the celestial spectacle, no one noticed the small smile that formed on the lips of Mrs. Jenkins, who had just arrived at the police station. The old housekeeper held in her hands a yellowed envelope, and her eyes shone with the knowledge of one last secret, a secret that would forever change the outcome of that story. Mrs. Jenkins entered the police station room with slow steps, her eyes shining with an ancient wisdom. The yellowed envelope in her hands trembled slightly, revealing the importance of what it contained. Before opening this, she said, her voice filled with emotion, I need to tell a story that I kept for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. All those present turned their attention to the housekeeper. Even Sophia, still kneeling on the floor, raised her tearful eyes. 20 years ago, began Mrs. Jenkins, sitting down in a chair that Ted quickly provided. I wasn't just a cleaner at the hotel. I was a confidant to many women who passed through there, women who cried hidden in the corridors, who whispered their secrets while I pretended to only clean the rooms. Beatrice approached, her eyes fixed on the envelope. You knew everything? I knew, my dear, replied Mrs. Jenkins softly. I knew and kept every story, every name, every tear shed. But I did more than that. I kept evidence. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. From inside, she took out several old photographs and a battered notebook. This notebook, she continued, belonged to your mother, Beatrice. Sophia lost it, or rather I found it on the night Robert assaulted her at the hotel 15 years ago. Sophia let out a strangled sob. That night, the night Beatrice found out everything. Yes, confirmed Mrs. Jenkins. The night you finally tried to confront your husband about the abuses, about the other women. The night you chose to become like him instead of fighting against. Lily, who listened to everything attentively from her mother's lap, frowned. But why didn't Aunt Sophia ask for help? The girl's innocent question hit Sophia like an arrow. Because I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid of losing everything, of being alone like I was, completed Irene softly. Like so many others were? Mrs. Jenkins opened the notebook carefully. Here are the names of all of them. 23 women over 15 years, not just the university students, but hotel employees, secretaries, cleaners, all with the same story. Detective Martinez approached to examine the notebook, but Mrs. Jenkins stopped him with a gesture. "There's more," she said, "something that nobody knows, not even Sophia or Robert." She took out of the envelope one last photograph, yellowed by time. In the picture, a young Sophia smiled, pregnant, next to an older woman. "This," Mrs. Jenkins pointed to the older woman, "was my sister Mary. She was a midwife at the hospital where Sophia had Beatrice. And she told me something, before she passed away, something that would change everything." Beatrice approached closer, her eyes fixed on the photograph. "What did she tell you?" "That on that night, not only one child was born," replied Mrs. Jenkins, her voice trembling. "Two were born." The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Sophia staggered, needing to lean against the wall. Beatrice brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "Twins," whispered Sophia. I had twins?" "Yes," confirmed Mrs. Jenkins, "but there were complications during the birth. The second baby was born very weak. Robert, who was already involved in his shady schemes, saw an opportunity. He convinced the doctors to declare that the second child had not survived and gave her up for adoption through his contacts." Beatrice collapsed into a chair, her legs no longer supporting her weight. "I have a twin sister, a sister who never knew existed." "You do," replied Mrs. Jenkins, taking out a last document from the envelope. "And I know exactly where she is." At that moment, Miles, who had remained extraordinarily quiet, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "Aunt Anna Claire has the same smile as Aunt Beatrice." The boy's innocent comment made everyone freeze. Anna Claire, the first of the former students to denounce Robert, was the same age as Beatrice, and now that they thought about it, shared with her a striking resemblance. "No," whispered Sophia, understanding. "It can't be." "It can be," replied Mrs. Jenkins. "Anna Claire was adopted by a family from Clearwater, the same city where my sister Mary lived her last years, the same city from where Anna Claire left to study at Robert's University without knowing that she was walking straight into a trap set by her own biological father." Lily, who had slipped from her mother's lap, approached Sophia. "When I was alone on the street," she said, her childish voice filled with a wisdom beyond her years, "I always dreamed that I would find my mommy again. Now Aunt Beatrice will be able to find her sister too." The girl's words seemed to awaken something in Sophia. For the first time since she had been arrested, her face showed a genuine emotion, not of manipulation or despair, but of true regret. "What have I done?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done, Robert? Our own daughter." Isabella, who watched everything in silence, hugged Miles tighter to her. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we need to lose everything to find what really matters." Detective Martinez cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. "Ladies," he said, "I think we need to make a very important call." But before he could reach the phone, hurried steps sounded in the corridor of the police station. Anna Claire entered the room, panting, her eyes immediately meeting those of Beatrice. The two women stared at each other in silence, seeing for the first time the reflection of their own faces in each other. It was like looking in a mirror that had been lost for 30 years. "I always knew," whispered Anna Claire, tears streaming down her face. "I always felt that there was a part of me missing." Beatrice stood up slowly, walking towards the sister she never knew she had. When they were just a step away, Lily again surprised everyone. "The stars are still dancing outside," she said, pointing to the window where the meteor shower continued. "I think they're also happy that you found each other." The two sisters finally hugged, 30 years of separation dissolving in tears of recognition. Sophia, watching the scene, sobbed uncontrollably, the reality of her actions finally hitting her with full force. But Mrs. Jenkins had not yet finished. There was more to the story. One last secret in her yellowed envelope, a final secret that would forever change the destiny of all those families. Mrs. Jenkins took a deep breath, her fingers caressing the last document inside the yellowed envelope. The meteor shower outside was beginning to wane, but its brilliance still illuminated the police station room through the windows, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "Before revealing this last secret," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I need everyone to understand one thing. Sometimes we keep secrets not out of malice, but out of love, for protection." Beatrice and Anna Claire, still embraced, turned their attention to the housekeeper. Sophia, who had been allowed by the detective to remain in the room due to the extraordinary circumstances, wiped her tears with her handcuffed hands. "When my sister Mary told me about the twins," continued Mrs. Jenkins, "she also gave me this." From inside the envelope she removed a will. The paper, yellowed by time, trembled in her wrinkled hands. "This is the will of Sophia's real mother," she announced, making everyone hold their breath. "The woman that Sophia always believed had abandoned her and Robert when they were children." Sophia staggered, needing to lean against the wall. "What do you mean, believed? My mother abandoned us when I was 5 years old. That's why you were so afraid of being abandoned," completed Mrs. Jenkins softly. "That's why you clung to Robert, even when he began to show who he really was." "My grandmother," whispered Beatrice. "I never knew anything about her." "Because Robert and his father built a lie," explained Mrs. Jenkins. "Your grandmother Antonia didn't abandon anyone. She discovered the illegal schemes that her husband did in the old family construction company. When she threatened to report him, he had her committed to a psychiatric hospital, claiming that she was mentally unstable." Detective Martinez approached. "Interested? Are you saying that this corruption scheme comes from 2 generations? "Exactly," confirmed Mrs. Jenkins. "Robert didn't create this system. He just continued what his father started. And Sophia, I became exactly like them," completed Sophia, her face a mask of horror and understanding. "But my mother, what happened to her?" "She never stopped fighting," replied Mrs. Jenkins, opening the will. "Even in the hospital, she continued gathering evidence, writing letters, trying to protect her daughter from afar. When she finally managed to prove her sanity and get out, it was too late. Sophia was already married to Robert, following in his father's footsteps." Lily, who listened to everything attentively from Irene's lap, frowned. "But where is Aunt? Beatrice's grandma now?" A sad smile formed on Mrs. Jenkins' lips. "She's in Clearwater, in the same house where I was about to move. My sister Mary took care of her all these years, keeping her safe, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth." She's alive?" Sophia sobbed, her legs failing. Beatrice ran to support her mother before she fell. "She is," confirmed Mrs. Jenkins. "And she never stopped loving you, Sophia, never stopped trying to fix things. This will, she left everything to you and your daughters. Not the dirty money from the old construction company, but what she built alone during all these years." "What did she build?" asked Anna Claire, her voice choked. "A network of shelters for women in vulnerable situations," replied Mrs. Jenkins. "Safe places where mothers and children can start over, study, work. She transformed her pain into something beautiful, something that could have helped all the women that you and Robert hurt." Sophia. Isabella, who had remained silent, hugged Miles tighter. The boy looked at Lily, who had slipped from Irene's lap and now approached Sophia. "Did you know that when I was on the street," began Lily, her childish voice filled with wisdom, "I also thought that my mommy had abandoned me. But she never abandoned me. She just couldn't reach me." The girl's words hit Sophia like lightning. She looked at her daughters, not only Beatrice, who she had always known existed, but also Anna Claire. who she had hurt without knowing that she was blood of her blood. She looked at Lily, the little girl who had been the spark to overthrow her entire castle of lies. She looked at Irene, who even after all the suffering she had caused, observed her now with compassion. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice broken. "Please, forgive me." It was when Miles, surprising everyone again, let go of his mother's embrace and walked to Sophia. In his small hands, he carried a drawing, the same one he had made earlier with Lily. "Look," he said, showing the paper to Sophia. "Lily taught me that when we draw a family, we have to make everyone's heart the same size, because in love there are no people more important than others." Anna Claire knelt beside the boy, observing the drawing. "And these dancing stars in the sky?" "Nah, they're to remember that there's always light," replied Lily, pointing to the window where the last meteors still streaked the sky, "even when it's all dark." Detective Martinez cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. "Ladies," he said, his voice softer than normal, "I think we need to make a call to Clearwater." But before anyone could move, hurried steps sounded in the corridor. An elderly lady entered the room leaning on a cane, her eyes, identical to Sophia's, shining with contained tears. "No need to call," she said softly. "I couldn't wait another minute to meet my granddaughters." "Mom," Sophia sobbed, her whole body trembling. Antonia opened her arms, and even with the handcuffs, even after 30 years of separation, Sophia ran to her mother's embrace like a small child seeking comfort. As the family reunited, Ted approached Irene. "Now I understand," he said softly. "I understand why Lily has so much wisdom in her eyes. She's like those stars out there. Even in the darkness, she found a way to shine." But there was still one last revelation to be made. Mrs. Jenkins held in her hands one last paper, a document that would change not only the destiny of that family, but of all of Harmony Creek. The last document that Mrs. Jenkins held in her trembling hands was an old deed dated 30 years ago. The housekeeper waited patiently until Sophia and Antonia separated from their embrace, until the tears were wiped away and all eyes turned to her. "This deed," she began, her voice choked with emotion, "is of the land where the Spring Hotel is built today. But it's not just any deed, it's proof that the hotel in fact belongs to Antonia." Sophia raised her eyes, confused. "What do you mean? The hotel has always been Robert's family's." "No," interrupted Antonia softly. "The hotel was mine. A gift from my father before I married your father, Robert. When I was forcibly committed, your father falsified the documents, transferring everything to his name." Detective Martinez took the deed, examining it carefully. "This changes everything," he said. "With this document, we can not only prove the initial fraud, but also track all the embezzlement of money from the last decades." "But there's more," continued Mrs. Jenkins. "Antonia doesn't want the hotel back. She has other plans for that place." All eyes turned to the elderly lady, who smiled serenely. "I want to transform the Spring Hotel into the first support center for women in Harmony Creek," she announced. "A place where stories like Irene's never happen again, where mothers and daughters can find not only shelter, but real opportunities to start over." Lily, who played distractedly with the hem of Irene's dress, raised her bright eyes. "Will there be a library? Aunt Isa said that books are like wings for us to fly." Antonia knelt with difficulty in front of the girl. "There will be a library, little one. And do you know who will help me choose the books?" "Who?" asked Lily, curious. "You, your mother, Beatrice, Anna Claire, all the women who passed through. That hotel carrying pain will now return to transform it into a place of hope." Ted, who listened to everything in silence, stepped forward. "And Barrett Construction will help with the renovation. Without costs, without embezzlement, without lies. It's the least we can do to start fixing so much wrong. Sophia, still handcuffed, but with a different glint in her eyes, turned to her daughters. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But if you give me a chance, I want to help too. I want to use all the knowledge I have, no longer to hurt, but to protect other women. How can we trust you? Asked Anna Claire, her voice trembling. It was Miles who answered, surprising everyone once again. When I did wrong to Lily, she forgave me, and now we're best friends. Sometimes we need to give a chance for the person's heart to grow. Beatrice and Anna Claire exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between the newly discovered sisters. Finally, Beatrice spoke. We're going to need time, Mom, a lot of time. But maybe we can start building something new, together. Isabella, who watched the scene hugged to Miles, felt tears running down her face. Sometimes, she said softly, families are not made only of blood. They are made of choices, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. At that moment, Mrs. Jenkins cleared her throat, calling everyone's attention again. There's one more thing, she said, taking out one last paper from the envelope. A letter that Mary, my sister, wrote before she passed away. A letter that she asked me to only open when all the truths came to light. With trembling hands, she opened the paper and began to read. Dear sister, if you are reading this letter, it means that finally the truth has come to light. It means that Sophia has found her daughters, that Antonia is free, that the cycle of pain has been broken. But there is something you need to know. None of this was coincidence. When Lily arrived at that hotel, when Irene was unfairly accused, when everything seemed lost, I was no longer here. But before I passed, I did one last thing. I put Lily in Ted's path. I knew that that little girl, with her purity and wisdom, would be the key to dismantling the whole castle of lies. It was not chance that led Lily to that dumpster on that specific day. It was I who, through small acts, guided her steps there. Because sometimes, sister, we need an angel on earth to fix so much wrong. And Lily, without knowing it, was that angel. With love, Mary. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of Irene's crying, who hugged Lily tightly. So, said the girl, her voice choked, Aunt Mary was taking care of me from heaven. She was, my love, replied Mrs. Jenkins. Just as now she must be smiling, seeing that her last act of love gave so many beautiful fruits, Antonia said, approaching Sophia and holding her handcuffed hands. Daughter, you have a long journey of redemption ahead, but now you're not alone anymore. And neither will the other women be, completed Irene, wiping away her tears. Because now we have each other. Detective Martinez, visibly moved, signaled for them to remove Sophia's handcuffs. Considering all the revelations and your willingness to cooperate, I think we can make a deal. You will have to answer for your actions, but you can help with the support center project under supervision. The light of dawn began to enter through the windows of the police station, marking the end of the most extraordinary night that Harmony Creek had ever witnessed. Outside, the last meteors streaked the sky like a final farewell dance. Miles and Lily, exhausted but happy, had fallen asleep embraced on a sofa, the family drawing still safe in their small hands. On the paper, the dancing stars they had drawn seemed to shine with their own light. You know, said Ted, watching the children, when Miles humiliated Lily that day, I thought I was teaching my son a lesson in humility. But in reality, it was this little girl who taught us the greatest lesson of all. What? Asked Isabella, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. That true love doesn't judge, doesn't demand, doesn't hold grudges. It simply transforms, heals, and illuminates. And so, as the sun rose in Harmony Creek, a new story began to be written, a story no longer of pain and secrets, but of redemption and hope. A story that began with a girl looking for food in a dumpster and ended with so many hearts transformed. Because sometimes the greatest lessons of love come from the smallest hearts, and sometimes, like the stars that danced in the sky that night, we need the darkness to realize how much brilliance we can have inside us.